A dawn in the desert, the world of the patriarchs. The first light of morning slips across a quiet expanse of desert. Pale gold touches the edges of distant hills, revealing a landscape both harsh and beautiful. A place where wind shapes the earth into long, rolling waves and where silence stretches for miles. The air is cool before the rising sun brings heat, and the only movement is the slow wander of a small pastoral camp, its animals stirring its people, waking to another day beneath the vast Bronze Age sky. In this stillness, the world of the early patriarchs comes into focus. They move through these open lands with flocks and tents, bound to the rhythms of grazing seasons and the fragile availability of water. Their footprints follow ancient routes carved long before their time by caravans threading between Mesopotamia, Canaan, and the lands stretching toward Egypt. This is the stage upon which the earliest chapters of Jewish history unfold in an age where mythic memory and historical reality blend like the shifting colors of dawn. Archaeologically, the world of the early second millennium BC is a tapestry of rising and falling city-states. To the east lies Mesopotamia, where Sumer-Akkad Babylon and Mari write their laws, conduct trade, and wage their wars along the great rivers. To the west, Canaan is a patchwork of fortified towns and rural villages, each governed by local rulers who owe allegiance to larger regional powers. Between these centers of settled life, pastoralists travel with their herds, forming a cultural bridge between the sedentary and nomadic worlds. It is among these pastoralists that the ancestors of the Jewish people first take shape. The biblical tradition introduces this age through the figure of Abraham, a man who, according to the narrative, leaves the comfort of an ancestral home in Mesopotamia and journeys toward a land shown to him by a divine voice. Whether Abraham was a single historical figure, a composite memory of early ancestors, or a symbol of a wider migration, historians agree on the broader backdrop. Many Semitic-speaking peoples traveled westward during the early second millennium BC, drawn by new opportunities in the Levant. Their movements align with shifts in climate trade networks and the political volatility of nearby empires. Mourning in the desert becomes a fitting metaphor for this transitional moment. Out of scattered kinship groups emerges something slowly coalescing, not yet a nation, not yet a kingdom, but a people whose identity is being shaped by covenant traditions, shared stories, and the experience of wandering. They live in tents of woven goat hair, carry water in skin bags, and cook simple meals over low fires. Their laws are unwritten, but preserved through memory and oral tradition. Their sense of ancestry is tied to elders who tell stories beneath the stars, tales of journeys, promises, and an unfolding relationship with the divine. Life in this world is not isolated. These early Hebrews, as they will later be called, intersect constantly with the great civilizations around them. They trade with urban centers for grain metal tools and pottery. They pass through fortified gates where scribes record transactions on clay tablets. They encounter Amorites, Hurrians, Hittites, and Canaanites cultures whose languages, deities, and customs form part of the mosaic of the ancient Near East. Archaeological finds from Middle Bronze Age, Canaan, reveal a region rich in cultural exchange, where pastoralists often served as messengers, guides, or hired labor for city-states. Yet they also remain distinct. Their worldview emphasizes a single covenantal relationship with a deity who is not confined to a particular city or statue. This distinction grows slowly, but its seeds are present in the earliest layers of tradition. The idea that the divine travels with them, not housed in a temple, not bound to one region, sets these people apart in a world dominated by fixed cult centers and territorial gods. As the sun climbs, the desert begins to shimmer. It becomes easier to imagine why these early ancestors moved with the seasons. Pastoralism thrives on constant motion, to find pastures, avoid drought, and protect animals from the extremes of heat and storm. These movements also shape social structures. Families are organized into clans. Authority flows through elders rather than kings, and disputes are resolved through council rather than courts. Women manage household economies, weaving textiles and preparing food, while men tend herds and negotiate alliances. Children learn survival skills not from schools, but from experience on the land. Political realities, too, play a role. Mesopotamian kings lay claim to vast territories, and Egyptian pharaohs extend influence into Canaan. When trade flourishes, pastoralists benefit. When conflict erupts, they adapt or move. The world of the patriarchs is marked by uncertainty, but also by opportunity for those who know how to read the land. Here the script deepens its lens. The Abrahamic tradition describes a covenant, a binding promise that transforms a wandering clan into a people with a destiny. Scholars often interpret this covenant as a cultural memory of early tribal agreements, commitments that unite families, preserve identity, and establish shared moral codes. Whether literal or symbolic, the idea of covenant becomes a defining theme of Jewish identity across millennia. Equally significant is the gradual transition toward Canaan. To settle in this region means encountering a land of contrasts, fertile valleys bordered by arid highlands, coastal plains rich in trade, and interior hills lined with terraced fields. Archaeological evidence shows small rural communities alongside powerful city-states, each with temples, palaces, and defensive walls. Pastoralists entering this region do not remain outsiders forever. Over generations, they integrate into local economies while maintaining distinct traditions. As afternoon approaches in our imagined opening scene, the camp begins to move. The pastoralists gather their flocks, tie down their tents, and set out along a narrow track, worn into the earth by countless journeys. They follow paths leading toward oases, wells, and settlements where caravans converge. These routes bind the ancient Near East into a single interconnected world, a world in which even small tribes participate in a vast network of exchange. And so the people walk, leaving behind the sands of mourning for the long distances ahead. In time, their descendants will face drought, famine, political upheaval, and migration into Egypt. But in this early era, they remain a people defined by motion, memory, and promise. As the sun lowers again toward the horizon, the desert quiet returns. Shadows stretch across the land, turning hills into silhouettes. In this gentle transition from day to night, one era gives way to another. The world of the patriarchs, shaped by wandering and covenant, will soon encounter the rising power of the Nile, a meeting that will alter the trajectory of Jewish history for centuries to come. And so, the journey continues, carried forward into the fertile floodplains and shadowed monuments of ancient Egypt. Into Egypt, migration, enslavement, and the weight of empire. Dawn breaks over a very different landscape. The desert horizon of the patriarchs gives way to the shimmering fields of the Nile Delta, a world of flowing water, glistening reeds, and the rhythmic hum of agricultural life. Mist rises above the riverbanks as fishermen cast nets, farmers tend to irrigation channels, and the great river itself glides silently south to north, carrying the memory of countless seasons. Here in this fertile cradle of civilization, the next chapter of Jewish history takes shape. The entry of the early Hebrews into Egypt unfolds against the backdrop of shifting political realities and environmental pressures. Tradition speaks of famine, a devastating cycle of drought in Canaan that pushes pastoral families southward in search of grain. Archaeologists know that the second millennium BC was marked by climate fluctuations that strained subsistence economies across the Levant. Egypt, with its steady Nile inundation, stood apart, dependable, abundant, capable of absorbing migrants from the surrounding regions. The Nile Delta of this era is unlike the Egypt of monumental stone that dominates popular imagination. It is a mosaic of marshes, villages, and trading posts where Asiatic peoples, Semitic-speaking groups from Canaan and beyond, settle as laborers, herders, craftsmen, and merchants. Excavations at sites such as Tel el-Daba reveal neighborhoods with Levantine pottery weapons and household customs, suggesting a substantial foreign presence well before the famous biblical events traditionally associated with Joseph. Into this multicultural environment, the ancestors of the Israelites enter, moving from a land of wandering flocks into the administrative machine of an empire. Their arrival mirrors the experiences of many Semitic migrants. They come seeking survival opportunity and stability under Egyptian rule. At first, they find it. The Delta is welcoming enough to provide work in agriculture construction or animal husbandry. Families settle near canals. Children grow up speaking both their ancestral tongue and the Egyptian language, and trade networks connect them to cities deeper within the Nile Valley. But Egypt is never static. Its dynasties rise and fall like the river itself. During the Middle and New Kingdom periods, the state becomes increasingly centralized, demanding organized labor for its ambitious building projects, its irrigation systems, and its military campaigns. What begins as a place of refuge slowly transforms into a system of control. Morning becomes midday, and the documentary eye shifts deeper into Egypt's political heart. The pharaoh is both king and god, a figure whose authority saturates every level of society. Bureaucrats record grain harvests with meticulous precision. Scribes tally labor rations. Overseers monitor work gangs along the riverbanks. To an Egyptian administrator, foreign populations in the Delta are both useful and potentially threatening a source of manpower, yet also groups whose loyalties may extend beyond Egypt's borders. It is in this tightening administrative landscape that the tradition of Jewish enslavement takes shape. The biblical account describes the Hebrews being forced into hard labor under a new king who did not know Joseph. Scholars interpret this as a memory of rising xenophobia and increased state control following political upheavals, perhaps during the expulsion of the Hyksos, a Semitic ruling class that once dominated northern Egypt. After their removal, Egyptian rulers may have viewed all Semitic groups with suspicion, placing them under harsher regulations. Archaeological and textual evidence does not document the Israelites specifically, but it does confirm the use of forced labor by foreign populations, especially in royal building projects. Scenes carved into temple walls depict laborers pulling stone blocks, mixing mud for bricks, and carrying supplies under the watch of overseers holding staffs. Labor could range from organized corvée service to outright slavery. For communities like the early Hebrews, whose numbers may have grown over generations, the burden would have been heavy indeed. The script widens to consider daily life under these conditions. Families would have lived in cramped settlements, working long hours in agriculture, brickmaking, or construction. They would have gathered for simple meals of bread, onions, and lentils. Children would have been raised amid the sounds of labor and the ever-present rhythm of Egyptian authority. Religious identity may have survived quietly in the recollection of ancestral stories and covenant promises, even as Egyptian deities towered over the public landscape. Yet even in hardship, Egypt leaves a lasting imprint. Exposure to a complex urban society, its writing systems, its monumental architecture, its administrative strategies, provides the foundational contrast against which later Jewish identity will evolve. The experience of centralized authority heightens the significance of covenant community. The memory of oppression deepens future commitments to justice, liberation, and moral law. In later centuries, the Exodus will become not just a historical tradition, but a defining symbol of identity ethics and divine purpose. The afternoon sun casts long shadows over the construction sites of ancient Egypt. Workers, Egyptians and foreigners alike, lift baskets of clay-shaped mud bricks and haul them to rising walls. Overseers shout commands drowned by the rhythmic thuds of labor. In the documentary's imagination, one can sense the weight of empire pressing down on the backs of individuals whose names history rarely records. But the story of the Hebrews in Egypt is not solely one of suffering. It is also a story of demographic growth, cultural adaptation, and emerging leadership. Within oppressive systems, new voices rise: elders who maintain traditions, midwives who defy unjust decrees, and eventually figures like Moses, though his emergence belongs to the next chapter. The seeds of liberation are planted in the soil of oppression. As the day ends, the Nile turns to copper under the setting sun. Boats drift silently across the water, their silhouettes dark against the glowing horizon. Fishermen pull in their final catch of the evening. Farmers drive their animals back to pens. In the Delta, foreign families gather near cooking fires, telling stories of the lands their ancestors once knew. Egypt, for all its grandeur, has become both home and prison, a place of life and toil, identity and subjugation. Night settles. The vast canopy of stars over the Nile is the same sky that once hung above the wandering camps of the Patriarchs. Under this shared sky, a transformation is underway. The descendants of desert shepherds are being forged into a community whose memory of suffering will shape their future laws, ethics, and worldview. This chapter closes not with a decisive event, but with a slow gathering tension, a sense that the equilibrium between empire and subject cannot hold forever. In the stillness of night, the whisper of change begins to move through the Delta. Soon, a leader will rise. Soon, the riverbanks of Egypt will witness a struggle that will echo across the centuries. From the shadows of oppression, the path toward liberation and the birth of law begins to take shape. Exodus, liberation, wilderness, and the birth of law. A hush settles over the desert after a night of rare storm. The clouds withdraw slowly, revealing a landscape washed clean by wind and distant rain. Pools of water glimmer among scattered rocks. A faint scent of wet dust lingers in the air. In this moment, between tempest and calm, the stage opens for one of the most enduring narratives of the ancient world, a story of liberation memory and the forging of identity. The Exodus occupies a unique place in Jewish history. It is at once a cultural memory, a religious foundation, and a historical puzzle. though the vast scale described in Scripture is not corroborated directly by archaeology, the lived experiences of Semitic laborers under Egyptian rule, the patterns of migration, and the existence of desert routes all support the notion of groups escaping Egypt during times of political instability. What emerges is a story that blends historical realities with the shaping force of tradition, a story that gives meaning to generations. The documentary view widens to the Nile Valley at the height of tension. Egyptian leadership, pressured by internal dissent or external threats, tightens its grip on foreign laborers. In this environment, a figure rises, Moses, born among the oppressed, raised in the shadow of power, and later driven into exile. His story, whether seen as history legend or a combination of both, reflects the emergence of a leader shaped by two worlds. He moves between the disciplined order of Egyptian nobility and the raw, free landscapes of the Midian desert. In this contrast, he discovers a calling that will change the fate of his people. The narrative moves slowly, carefully, like the footsteps of those who first left Egypt. The biblical account describes plagues, negotiations, divine intervention, and catastrophic upheaval. Historians explore these stories through the lens of natural phenomena, Nile discoloration from algae blooms, insect cycles, livestock disease, dust storms, all of which could have been interpreted as divine judgment in the worldview of the time. But beyond specific events lies a deeper truth, the memory of a dramatic confrontation between an imperial power and a marginalized people seeking freedom. As dawn breaks over the Nile Delta in our imagined tableau, small groups prepare to move. They gather bundles of belongings, lead their animals quietly in the half-darkness, and slip away through reed-lined shallows. The scale of the departure is uncertain, but the emotional imprint is profound. This is not merely a physical journey, it is a breaking of chains, psychological, social, and spiritual. The scene transitions to the wilderness. The desert is both refuge and crucible. Its silence contains both safety from Egyptian pursuit and the challenges of survival. Under the relentless sun, the vast expanses of Sinai and the Arabian Peninsula stretch with alternating beauty and danger dunes that change with every wind, mountains that rise like ancient fortresses, and valleys where rare vegetation clings to life. The people who move through this environment learn resilience by necessity. Here, in this austere landscape, a new community forms. No longer bonded laborers in the structure of an empire, they must build governance, morality, and shared purpose from the ground up. The tradition speaks of laws given at Sinai, a covenant that establishes justice, ethical conduct, ritual practices, and a collective identity rooted in divine guidance. Scholars interpret these laws as reflecting the lived realities of a people transitioning from servitude to self-determination. Codes about fairness, protection of the vulnerable, and remembrance of oppression reveal a deep moral logic shaped by recent trauma. The mountain scene emerges slowly, like a dream rendered in stone. In the documentary imagination, a solitary peak towers over a camp of thousands shrouded in low clouds. Wind whistles through narrow passes as elders gather at the base, awaiting instruction. Lightning flickers among the clouds, illuminating the stark outlines of the mountain. Whether one interprets this as divine revelation, volcanic activity, or a memory intensified by centuries of storytelling, the moment commands reverence. It marks the symbolic birth of a nation defined not by geography, but by covenant. As the narrative unfolds, the documentary tone deepens its analysis. The laws attributed to this period moral ritual Civil create a framework that unifies diverse clans. They preserve memory. Remember that you were strangers in the land of Egypt. They shape social structures. Elders, judges, and priests guide the community. They establish rhythms of rest, agriculture, and worship. Over time, these laws will evolve, adapt, and gain new layers of interpretation, but their origins lie in the stark simplicity of desert life. Yet the wilderness is not only a place of revelation, it is also a place of struggle. Food and water are scarce, routes are uncertain, disputes arise among the people. The desert tests their resolve and exposes the tensions inherent in a people learning to govern themselves. The tradition of wandering for 40 years reflects a prolonged period of transition, long enough for a new generation, unshaped by slavery, to emerge. Archaeology has uncovered evidence of ancient encampments and desert sanctuaries in Sinai that evoke the memory of these migrations, though the precise historicity remains debated. Still, the symbolic essence of the story remains clear. Before the people can inherit a homeland, they must first understand who they are. They must forge unity, establish law, and internalize the lessons of bondage. The wilderness becomes a workshop of transformation, where old identities dissolve and new ones take form. As the sun lowers once more across the rocky expanse, shadows lengthen and the desert cools. The campfires of the wandering people appear like scattered stars across the ground. They gather for meals of unleavened bread and roasted meat, telling stories of their escape from Egypt, passing memories from one generation to the next. These stories, shaped by time, embellished by tradition, rooted in real experiences of hardship and hope, will become the backbone of a culture and a faith. The closing scene of this part shows the people poised on the edge of a new frontier. Beyond the desert lies Canaan, a land of hills and valleys, tents and fortified towns, promise and challenge. The wilderness has given them identity, but the next stage will demand settlement, adaptation, and new forms of social organization. As night deepens over the Sinai, stars emerge in astonishing clarity. Under this ancient sky, a community once enslaved now stands as a people of law and covenant. Ahead lies Canaan, a land of both opportunity and conflict, where the journey of nationhood truly begins. Conquest and settlement. The land takes shape. A pale morning mist settles over the highlands of ancient Canaan. The hills are steep and terraced, rising in long folds toward a sky that is just beginning to lighten. Olive trees cling to the slopes in irregular clusters. Narrow goat paths weave between boulders smoothed by centuries of footsteps. In the stillness before sunrise, this land appears timeless, rugged, beautiful, and contested. It is here in these uplands and valleys that the next chapter of Jewish history unfolds. After the long wanderings of the wilderness, the descendants of the Exodus now face the challenge of entering and settling a land already inhabited by a tapestry of cultures, Canaanites, Amorites, Jebusites, and others whose fortified towns and agricultural fields define the landscape. This period marks a transition from movement to rootedness, from tribal confederation to the early frameworks of settled society. The documentary lens moves slowly across an archaeological excavation. Potsherds, collapsed walls, and traces of ancient hearths reveal lives lived thousands of years ago. Scholars examining these layers see evidence not of a single sweeping conquest, but of a more complex process. Gradual settlement by semi-nomadic groups, local conflicts, shifting alliances, and cultural blending. While the biblical narrative speaks in epic terms of battles and decisive victories, Archaeology suggests a slower, more organic emergence of early Israel within the highlands. The scene shifts to the daily rhythms of these hilltop settlements. At dawn, families rise to grind grain-feed animals and prepare tools for the day's work. Women knead dough on flat stones. Men lead goats and sheep to graze along the rocky slopes. Children collect firewood in the thin morning light. Houses are small, often built with stone foundations and mud brick walls arranged around courtyards where meals are shared and disputes settled. This simple but resilient lifestyle contrasts sharply with the monumental architecture and urban complexity of Egypt, reinforcing the uniqueness of Israel's early development. These early settlers live in a decentralized system. Villages operate independently, each governed by elders whose authority rests on wisdom, ancestry, and the ability to maintain peace within the clan. Yet despite this fragmentation, a sense of shared identity is emerging, shaped by their common memories of Egypt, their experience in the wilderness, and their covenant traditions. Altars appear on prominent hills. Simple sanctuaries are erected near springs. Rituals reflect devotion to a singular deity whose presence they believe accompanies them in this new land. Politically, Canaan is a mosaic of small city-states, each surrounded by agricultural fields and defended by walls. The arrival of new populations into the highlands creates tension. Some towns resist violently, others forge alliances. Trade develops where conflict once stood, and cultural exchange becomes unavoidable. Pottery styles shift. Religious artifacts show both continuity and change, and burial practices reflect the blending of traditions. These clues preserved in the ground speak quietly of a world in transition. The camera of the mind turns toward the larger geopolitical setting. The collapse of the Late Bronze Age around the 12th century BC destabilizes the major powers of the region. Egyptian influence in Canaan wanes. The great cities of the Levant decline or fall, and new groups known as the Sea Peoples arrive along the coasts. Into this environment of upheaval, early Israelite communities take root with renewed confidence. They are not alone in their struggle. Many peoples are redefining themselves amidst the ruins of older systems. By midday, the mist has evaporated, revealing a landscape bright with sunlight and dotted with terraced fields. The settlers cultivate barley, wheat, olives, and grapes. They construct cisterns to capture precious rainwater, dig storage pits for grain, and reinforce pathways between villages. Slowly, the land begins to shape them, and they begin to shape the land. The labor is intense, but it yields a sense of permanence that pastoral life could never provide. The biblical tradition portrays this period as one of dramatic military action: walls, falling cities, overtaken lands divided. Scholars, however, emphasize a more nuanced reality. Some towns were indeed destroyed during this era, but others show continuity of occupation. Moreover, new sites appear on previously uninhabited hilltops, small planned settlements that bear the hallmarks of a cohesive cultural identity. These highland villages, rather than the ruins of conquered cities, offer the clearest archaeological evidence of Israel's emergence. The documentary narrative deepens into analysis. Why did these groups coalesce into a new identity rather than blend entirely into existing Canaanite culture? The answer lies partly in their traditions of covenant and law-unifying elements that preserved community memory and differentiated them from surrounding peoples. It lies also in their decentralized social structure, which favored resilience in times of political collapse, and it lies in their religious distinctiveness, which contributed to a shared worldview capable of binding diverse clans into a single people. Afternoon fades toward evening. The hills turn amber, and long shadows stretch across the terraces. In a reconstructed ancient village, the firelight glows from within stone courtyards. Families gather for meals of lentils, bread, and figs. Elders recount stories of the journey from Egypt and the miracle of survival in the wilderness. These stories become part of a shared national memory that will endure for generations. Religious life during this period is localized and varied. Simple shrines dot the countryside, usually located near springs or high places. Animal sacrifices, communal meals, and celebrations mark the agricultural calendar. Some practices resemble those of neighboring cultures, but over time, a stronger monotheistic tradition emerges, reinforced by the covenant memory and by prophets who call the people to loyalty and justice. The region's challenges, however, are far from over. The decentralized tribal system leaves the people vulnerable to external threats, especially from powerful groups like the Philistines along the coast. As pressure builds, the question of governance becomes increasingly important. How can scattered tribes defend themselves, uphold justice, and maintain unity without central leadership? The camera rises for a final wide shot. From above, the highlands appear as a patchwork of settlements, terraced fields, and winding paths. Smoke rises from evening fires. Distant shepherds guide their flocks home. The day ends quietly, but history is stirring beneath the surface. The land is taking shape, and the people who inhabit it are beginning to sense the need for a new era of organization and leadership. Night descends over Canaan. The stars emerge cold and bright above the hilltops. In this stillness, the age of settlement draws to a close. Ahead lies an era of charismatic leaders, judges, who will rise in moments of crisis and guide this emerging people through conflict, confusion, and the search for unity. The age of judges, a fragmented people, searching for unity. Dawn spreads across the rugged hills of ancient Israel, casting long beams of pale light over scattered hamlets nestled among terraced slopes. Smoke rises quietly from simple hearths. Shepherds lead their flocks into the cool morning air. There is no capital city, no palace, no throne, only clusters of tribal settlements linked by memory covenant, and a fragile sense of shared identity. This is the world of the judges, an era defined not by kings or empires, but by charismatic leaders called forth in moments of crisis. The land is beautiful, yet precarious, a mosaic of tribal territories stretching from the Galilee's green hills to the dry southern wilderness. Its inhabitants are bound by ancestral stories, but divided by geography, custom, and local loyalties. The people are free yet vulnerable. The documentary Eye first observes a typical highland village. Its homes are modest, built of stone and mud brick. Women grind barley on heavy querns while children chase goats through narrow alleys. Men inspect tools, sharpen blades, and prepare for seasonal planting. Life is communal and practical, centered on agriculture, herding, and small-scale craftsmanship. There is no professional army. Defense rests on the courage of individual clans. There is no royal treasury. Wealth is measured in grain, livestock, and the goodwill of neighbors. Yet the simplicity of daily life conceals a simmering instability. Surrounding Israel's loosely connected tribes are powerful and aggressive peoples. Philistines along the coast, Canaanite city-state remnants in fortified towns, Ammonites and Moabites across the Jordan, and Midianite raiders who descend from the desert on swift camels. Each group presses its own ambitions on the land, seeking resources, influence, and territorial control. In this landscape of competing interests, the early Israelites struggle to maintain autonomy. Their decentralized society, once an advantage during the settlement era, now becomes a liability. Tribes often act independently, reluctant to aid one another except under extraordinary circumstances. Without a unified political structure, each crisis threatens the stability of the whole. The visual narrative shifts to a wind-swept battlefield after a raid. Arrows lie scattered in the dust. Abandoned shields catch the morning light. The quiet aftermath reflects the vulnerability of a people caught between pastoral heritage and the demands of a world ruled increasingly by standing armies and fortified cities. It is during such moments of danger that a judge, a shofet, emerges. The judges are not rulers in the later monarchical sense. They are regional leaders chosen for their bravery, wisdom, or spiritual vision. Some are warriors who rally tribes against invasion. Others are arbiters who settle disputes and restore internal order. Their authority is temporary, their power limited by the voluntary allegiance of the tribes they lead. Yet these figures embody the resilience of early Israel. Archaeologists and historians see the age of the judges as a time of internal development. Settlement patterns stabilize. Villages grow in size and complexity. New technologies, notably iron tools and weapons, slowly spread through the region. Agricultural terraces expand across the hillsides, enabling larger populations. Despite external threats, cultural identity strengthens. Oral traditions flourish, preserving memories of the Exodus, the wilderness years, and the covenant. These traditions offer moral guidance in a world without central authority. The documentary tone deepens as it analyzes the era's social structure. At the heart of community life is the household, an extended family network that forms the building block of society. Elders convene at village gates to judge cases of theft, property boundaries, and marital disputes. Ritual life centers on local shrines where sacrifices and festivals bind communities together. There is no single religious center. Instead, worship is decentralized, reflecting the broader social patterns of the time. But this decentralization also allows regional variation and occasional syncretism. Archaeological finds reveal household figurines and cult objects, suggesting that some families blended ancestral practices with Canaanite religious elements. Priesthoods exist, but they lack the unified structure that will later emerge under the monarchy. The people's devotion to their God is sincere, but often inconsistent, shaped by the challenges and temptations of survival in a complex and multicultural land. The narrative transitions into a scene of evening in a highland settlement. Villagers gather around small fires, listening to elders recount tales of deliverance stories of individuals raised up to save their people. Though rooted in oral tradition and later recorded in dramatic literary form, these stories reflect real pressures, foreign incursions, internal conflicts, and the struggle to maintain cohesion. One can imagine these legends being told under the stars, the defeat of a powerful Canaanite king by a coalition of tribes rallied by Deborah, a rare example of female authority in the ancient Near East. The desperate uprising led by Gideon against Midianite raiders, reflecting the economic devastation caused by nomadic incursions. The tragic story of Jephthah, illustrating the dangers of rash vows and the fragile nature of leadership built on personal reputation. The turbulent life of Samson, whose strength symbolizes both the potential and the recklessness of charismatic deliverers. Historically, such narratives offer insight into a society searching for stability as it navigates the transition from loosely connected clans to a more unified political entity. Each judge represents a moment when tribal identity momentarily coalesced in the face of danger, only to fracture again when the threat passed. This cycle, oppression, resistance, deliverance, peace, relapse, characterizes much of the period. The documentary gaze shifts toward the broader region. In the coastal plains, the Philistines are rising in strength, equipped with iron weapons and supported by more organized political structures. Their presence intensifies pressure on the central highlands. In the north, Canaanite city-states consolidate power behind fortified walls. In the east, Ammonite and Moabite kingdoms retain firm territorial claims. Israel, caught in the rugged interior, must either adapt or be engulfed. As the sun sets over the hills, long shadows stretch across the land. The faces of villagers are illuminated by flickering firelight, as a sense of anxious anticipation settles over the scene. The age of judges, for all its courage and heroism, reveals the fundamental weakness of a society without central leadership. The people yearn for stability, for a leader not only in battle, but in daily governance, law, and national identity. And so, as the flames burn low and the stars emerge one by one, a new era approaches. The fragmented tribes, shaped by hardship and bound by covenant, stand on the threshold of transformation. They will soon call for a king, a human ruler, who can unite them, defend them, and establish the foundations of a nation. Night deepens over the hills of Israel. The fires dim. In the quiet darkness, the age of charismatic judges begins to fade. Ahead lies the rise of kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, whose reigns will reshape the destiny of the land and its people. The rise of kings, Saul, David, Solomon. A soft morning haze hangs over the hills of ancient Israel. The sunlight spreads gently across terraced slopes, illuminating grain fields ready for harvest, and villages just beginning to stir from sleep. Roosters crow, sheep bleat, and women draw water from stone cisterns. Life in the highlands continues much as it has for generations, simple, communal, rooted in ancestral memory. Yet beneath this familiar routine, something new is rising. The old tribal order is straining under the pressures of a changing world. Foreign enemies, especially the formidable Philistines, press harder against the borders. Internal disputes weaken cooperation among tribes. The age of judges has shown moments of brilliance, but also the fragility of a leaderless society. The camera of the documentary moves slowly across the land, capturing the transition taking hold. The people have begun to voice a collective longing for unity, for stability, for someone who can lead them not just in battle, but in peace. They ask for a king, a monarch like those of surrounding nations, a figurehead to rally behind, a symbol of identity and continuity. The story begins with Saul, a king, born of necessity. In the cool of early morning before the heat of the day arrives, Saul of the tribe of Benjamin is searching for lost livestock. The biblical narrative paints him as tall, imposing, a natural leader. Historically and archaeologically, his reign represents the transition from tribal confederation to centralized authority. The Philistine threat has reached alarming levels, aided by superior iron weaponry and disciplined military organization. The Israelites, whose metallurgy is far less advanced, are in desperate need of coordinated defense. Saul's early victories galvanize the tribes. For the first time, Israel acts with unified intent, gathering under a single banner. Villages once isolated by rugged terrain now send warriors to a central command. The idea of nationhood, still fragile, takes its first steps. But Saul's reign also reflects the complexities of early monarchy. His governance lacks the institutional structure that later kings will build. His authority depends heavily on personal charisma, tribal loyalty, and the volatile support of warriors. As pressures mount from the Philistines, from internal dissent, and from his own psychological struggles, Saul's leadership fractures. His decline symbolizes the difficulty of transforming a loose tribal network into a stable kingdom. The documentary view lingers on a quiet moment, Saul brooding alone as twilight settles, aware that the loyalty of the people is slipping away. Change is imminent. History is preparing to shift. David, warrior, poet, and king. The scene transitions to the rolling hills near Bethlehem. A shepherd boy tends a flock beneath the shade of an olive tree, his harp resting nearby. David enters history as an unlikely figure, young, underestimated, yet possessing a blend of sensitivity and courage that sets him apart. His rise is cinematic. The confrontation with Goliath, whether embellished by tradition or based on a real military encounter, symbolizes the triumph of faith and ingenuity over brute force. More importantly, David's ascent reveals a man capable of uniting people, inspiring loyalty, and navigating political realities with rare skill. Historically, David's reign marks the consolidation of Israel. He builds alliances, subdues hostile neighbors, and captures the strategically crucial city of Jerusalem. Once a small Jebusite hill town, Jerusalem becomes a neutral center, not tied to any single tribe, ideal for a national capital. The documentary camera pans across the ridgelines of ancient Jerusalem. Workers carve new structures into the hillside. Fortifications rise. Carpentry echoes through narrow streets as a city comes alive. David brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, merging religious symbolism with political centralization. The city becomes more than a capital. It becomes a spiritual heart. Yet David's reign is not free of turmoil. Family conflicts, succession disputes, and moments of moral failing reveal the human cost of kingship. His story, preserved with remarkable honesty in the biblical tradition, offers a portrait of a leader whose greatness is intertwined with deep personal struggle. Through triumph and tragedy, David forges a dynasty whose influence will echo for centuries. Solomon, architect of an age. As morning light sweeps over a landscape now marked by stability and ambition, Solomon ascends the throne. The kingdom he inherits is strong, expansive, and ready for monumental change. His reign is associated with wealth diplomacy and unprecedented building projects. The documentary scene shifts to the bustling markets of ancient Jerusalem. Merchants call out prices. Exotic goods arrive from Arabia, Egypt, and Phoenicia, spices, copper, cedar wood, ivory. Solomon's alliances, especially with the Phoenician city-state of Tyre, bring skilled craftsmen and architects who elevate Jerusalem into a radiant urban center. At the heart of his achievements stands the first temple. The camera sweeps across a grand construction site, cedar beams hauled from distant forests, massive stone blocks pulled by teams of workers, artisans carving intricate designs, priests overseeing ritual details. The temple is more than a magnificent building. It is a declaration. It centralizes worship anchors, national identity, and symbolizes the union of people, land, and deity. For the first time, Israel possesses a sacred structure rivaling those of Egypt and Mesopotamia, not in size but in spiritual significance. Under Solomon, the kingdom reaches its geographic and economic zenith. Trade flourishes. Administration becomes more sophisticated. Written traditions deepen, perhaps laying early foundations for the wisdom literature that will later bear his name. Yet the seeds of future division begin to sprout. Solomon's extensive building projects demand heavy taxation and forced labor. Administrative districts override traditional tribal boundaries. Influence from foreign wives and their cultures introduces tensions into religious life. The unity forged by David begins to strain under the weight of imperial ambition. An era ends, another begins. As the sun sets over Jerusalem, its golden light reflects off the temple's fresh stone and bronze. The kingdom appears strong, confident, unshakable. But the quiet beneath the surface tells another story of rising burdens, discontent, and the question of succession. The united monarchy has lasted only 3 kings. Under Solomon's son, it will fracture. The camera pulls back, revealing the hills and valleys bathed in warm light. Smoke rises from village hearths, shepherds guide flocks home, and the wind rustles through olive branches. The age of kings has brought triumph, centralization, and splendor, but also complexity, inequality, and new forms of tension. Night falls over the capital and the countryside alike. Ahead lies division, 2 kingdoms, 2 destinies, and a long struggle for survival in a land caught between empires. A kingdom divided Israel and Judah. The morning sun rises slowly over the ridgelines of ancient Judea, casting soft gold across the hills and valleys. Terraced fields glow in the early light. Olive trees shimmer in the breeze. It is a serene landscape, calm, orderly, timeless. Yet, beneath this quiet beauty, a profound fracture has just reshaped the destiny of the Jewish people. The united monarchy of Saul, David, and Solomon has come to an end. In its place stand 2 kingdoms like siblings, once bound by shared memory, now drifting into rivalry. The split is not sudden, but the culmination of years of mounting pressure, heavy taxation, forced labor, tribal grievances, and the tension between centralized rule and local identity. When Solomon dies, these forces erupt. The camera sweeps across a gathering at Shechem. Rehoboam, Solomon's son, listens to the pleas of northern tribes who demand relief from the burdens of his father's policies. His refusal, driven by youthful pride and the counsel of hardline advisers, ignites a revolt. 10 tribes form their own state in the north Israel, with its shifting capitals of Shechem, Tirzah, and eventually Samaria. In the south, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin remain loyal to the Davidic line, forming Judah with Jerusalem as its spiritual and political heart. The division is complete. A single people now follow 2 paths. The northern kingdom, prosperity and instability. The documentary view turns northward, where the terrain rolls into broad valleys and fertile plains. The kingdom of Israel is larger, wealthier, and strategically positioned along trade routes that connect Egypt, Phoenicia, and Mesopotamia. Its economy thrives on agriculture, viticulture, olive production, and foreign commerce. But its politics are volatile. Without a stable dynastic tradition, Israel experiences frequent coups, assassinations, and competing claims to the throne. Archaeological evidence, including monumental structures at Megiddo-Dan and Hazor, reflects periods of rapid development under strong rulers like Omri and Ahab. Their reigns bring military power, urban growth, and diplomatic marriages that tie Israel to regional powers such as Phoenicia. Yet prosperity comes at a cost. Wealth concentrates in elite households. Rural farmers face exploitation through taxation, land consolidation, and debt servitude. The prophets of this era, Amos, Hosea, Elijah, Elisha, arise not as court advisors but as voices crying out against moral decay, social injustice, and religious syncretism. The documentary camera lingers on a hillside where a lone figure speaks to a gathering of villagers. He condemns corruption, warns of looming disaster, and calls for a return to covenant ethics. These prophetic traditions preserved in biblical literature give historians insights into the socio-economic tensions of the northern kingdom. Israel is powerful, but fragile. The southern kingdom continuity and vulnerability. Turning south, the film enters the more rugged terrain of Judah. Jerusalem rises from its hilltop like a small fortified jewel. Though Judah is smaller and less wealthy than Israel, it possesses stability, rooted in the Davidic dynasty and the centrality of the temple. Its kings claim a sacred legitimacy tied to earlier promises and traditions. Judah's society is less urbanized, but more cohesive. Rural life remains the backbone of its economy. The temple remains its unifying religious center. Periods of reform, especially under kings like Asa, Jehoshaphat, Hezekiah, and Josiah, seek to purify religious practices, strengthen covenant identity, and centralize worship in Jerusalem. Yet Judah is not immune to external pressure. Its location places it at the crossroads of empires: Egypt to the southwest, Assyria, and Babylon to the east, and the rising power of Persia on the horizon. Its relative weakness forces it into precarious diplomacy alliances, tribute payments, and occasional rebellions that carry heavy consequences. The camera shifts to Jerusalem's temple courts where priests conduct rituals, scribes copy sacred texts, and pilgrims bring offerings. Cultural and religious life flourishes. Psalmic poetry, prophetic visions, and legal traditions deepen into rich literary forms. Here in the city of stone and memory, Judaism begins to take shape as a textual and communal faith anchored in history and meaning. Two kingdoms under the shadow of empire. As the documentary widens its view, the region's geopolitical backdrop comes into sharp focus. The ancient Near East is entering an age of imperial giants. The Assyrian Empire expands with relentless ambition, absorbing or crushing every smaller state in its path. Its armies march with iron-weapon siege engines and brutal tactics designed to break resistance. Israel and Judah cannot remain isolated from this rising tide. Israel, strategically valuable and economically tempting, becomes a prime target. Its kings struggle to balance tribute demands with nationalist resistance. Some ally with neighboring states, others rebel. Each choice brings consequences. Judah watches nervously from the south, caught between fear of Assyria and dependence on its stronger neighbors. Its kings oscillate between appeasement and reform, trying to preserve autonomy in an increasingly dangerous world. The camera narrows onto a clay tablet inscribed with cuneiform Assyrian records that reference Israel, Judah, and their rulers. Archaeology corroborates the biblical narrative. Both kingdoms are under immense pressure. Both navigate the treacherous diplomacy of empire, and both face the limits of their power. Religious transformation and identity under tension. The divide between Israel and Judah is not only political. It affects religion, culture, and social cohesion. In the north, rival sanctuaries at Bethel and Dan challenge the centrality of Jerusalem. Israelite kings create new cultic symbols, mixing ancestral traditions with Canaanite practices and regional innovations. This religious plurality reflects the kingdom's openness, but also its vulnerability to internal fragmentation. In the South, the temple becomes a focal point for religious reforms that seek to unify belief and practice. Textual traditions grow richer, prophetic activity intensifies, and scribal culture strengthens. Judah's sense of historical destiny crystallizes in ways that will influence Judaism for centuries. Both kingdoms share common ancestry and cultural heritage, but their paths diverge sharply, one shaped by economic power and political volatility, the other by religious continuity and strategic caution. Foreshadowing the next crisis. As evening settles over the land, the documentary camera pulls back for a sweeping aerial view of Israel and Judah. Two sister kingdoms lie side by side, their histories intertwined yet increasingly distinct. Farmers lead their animals to shelter, smoke rises from hearths, distant city lights twinkle along hilltops and valleys. But the serenity is deceptive. A storm is gathering beyond the horizon, the Assyrian war machine poised to redefine the fate of nations. In this twilight, the divided kingdoms stand vulnerable. Israel's instability will soon meet the might of Assyria. Judah, though momentarily spared, will face its own crucible in the generations ahead. The day closes in quiet, but history is moving relentlessly forward. Ahead lies catastrophe for the northern kingdom and the disappearance of the tribes once known as Israel. Assyria and the fall of Israel. The day begins with a low gray sky hanging over the northern valleys of ancient Israel. Mist clings to the fields. The wind moves through olive groves with a restless whisper. It is a landscape on the brink, quiet, fertile, familiar, yet overshadowed by a distant thunder, not of weather, but of war. To the northeast, beyond the curve of the Fertile Crescent, an empire is rising with unprecedented force. Assyria, disciplined, relentless, and brutally efficient, has begun its march across the ancient Near East. Its armies move like an iron storm, reshaping borders, destroying local autonomy, and demanding absolute submission. For the Kingdom of Israel, this rising power represents both an existential threat and a final test of political survival. The Assyrian machine awakens. The documentary lens travels far beyond Israel's borders to the heart of Assyria, the city of Nimrud, where stone reliefs line palace walls. Here, kings like Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, and Sargon II record their triumphs in scenes carved with chilling precision, siege engines, battering walls, deportees marching in long columns, captives kneeling before the throne. Assyria's strength lies not only in military might, but in bureaucracy. Clay tablets detail tribute lists, supply chains, military rosters, and correspondence between provincial governors. Their empire is an engine organized, unyielding, and driven by a worldview that assumes Assyria has a divine mandate to rule. As the empire expands westward, Israel lies directly in its path. Internal weakness. Israel before the fall. Returning to the hills of Samaria, the film reveals a kingdom worn down by decades of instability. Coups have weakened the monarchy. Rival factions fight for influence. The wealthy accumulate estates while small farmers sink into debt. Prophets warn of moral decay, but their voices often go unheeded. Archaeological layers show stark contrasts: luxury ivories from Samaria's elite homes, charred destruction layers in smaller towns, abandoned rural sites reflecting population displacement. These findings paint a portrait of a society strained to its limits. The Northern Kingdom attempts diplomacy, then defiance, then desperate alliances with neighboring states. Each move only tightens the noose. Israel cannot match Assyria's organization, economy, or firepower, and yet it resists for survival, for identity, for the ancestral land that has shaped it. Tiglath-Pileser III and the First Blows. The documentary shifts to 734-732 BC. Assyrian forces sweep along the coast and into the highlands, their advance marked by smoke rising from rebellious towns. Tiglath-Pileser III annexes large parts of northern Israel, transforming them into Assyrian provinces. Tens of thousands of people are deported, a deliberate strategy to weaken resistance and integrate conquered regions into the empire. Stone inscriptions testify to these campaigns. They describe Israelite cities taken, tribute imposed, and populations relocated to distant corners of the empire. The northern kingdom survives as a shadow of itself, diminished and dependent, but its final hour is approaching. The Siege of Samaria. The film transitions to the year 722 BC. The sky is heavy with dust as Assyrian troops surround Samaria, Israel's capital. Siege ramps rise slowly, built from timber and earth by thousands of laborers. Archers take positions, slingers whirl stones above their heads. Drums beat a steady rhythm, the sound of impending conquest. Inside the city, food grows scarce. Water reserves dwindle. Families huddle in stone houses as the walls tremble under the weight of Assyrian assault. The once prosperous capital is now a place of fear, hunger, and relentless pressure. After a siege likely lasting around 3 years, the gate is breached. Assyrian inscriptions, including those of Sargon II, record the fall with cold precision. He captured Samaria, deported its inhabitants, and resettled conquered peoples in their place. This policy mass relocation is not random cruelty, but a calculated strategy to prevent rebellion. By mixing populations, Assyria disrupts local identities and consolidates control. The kingdom of Israel is no more. The dispersed tribes' memory and mystery. As the documentary moves through time, the camera follows long lines of deportees traveling eastward. They walk past brown hills and across rivers bound toward distant lands in Mesopotamia and beyond. Their names are lost to history, their fates recorded only in faint traces, references in Assyrian documents, hints in later Jewish literature, echoes in cultural memory. Later generations will call them the 10 lost tribes, not vanished in some dramatic disappearance, but absorbed slowly into the vast expanse of the Assyrian Empire. Their language, customs, and identity gradually blend into the cultures around them. Archaeologists uncover fragments of their journey inscriptions referencing deported Israelites living in Assyrian towns, material culture showing Levantine influences far from home burial practices, hinting at preserved traditions. But the full story remains obscured by time, a poignant reminder of how fragile ancient communities could be. Judah watches from the south. The camera now turns to Judah. On a hill overlooking Jerusalem, people gather anxiously as news of Samaria's fall reaches them. The destruction of Israel sends shockwaves throughout the region. Judah is now the last remnant of the Davidic kingdom, a small state dwarfed by the Assyrian juggernaut. Kings like Hezekiah embark on ambitious reforms, centralized worship, strengthened defenses, new water systems, such as the famed Siloam Tunnel. These efforts reflect both religious conviction and practical necessity. Judah must unify or perish. Assyria's shadow looms large over Jerusalem, and its armies will soon stand at its gates. But that is a story for the next chapter. For now, the fall of Israel stands as a turning point, a moment when a kingdom once defined by promise succumbs to the weight of empire. The northern tribes fade from the historical record, but their legacy endures in texts, traditions, and the deep ancestral memory of the Jewish people. A wider reflection: what was lost, what was preserved. As evening descends, the documentary camera pulls back over the northern hills. Fields lie abandoned, ruins of fortified towns crumble into dust. The laughter of children, the songs of farmers, the prayers of prophets, all have fallen silent. Yet not everything is gone. The cultural legacy of Israel survives in the writings preserved by Judah, in the traditions that shape prophetic literature, in the memory of a people whose identity endures beyond political destruction. History has shifted. The world has changed. The land itself seems to breathe differently in the wake of conquest. Night covers the valleys. A cold wind moves through the remnants of Samaria. The kingdom has fallen, but the story continues, now focused on Judah, whose fate lies entwined with the next great empire waiting beyond the horizon. Ahead lies Babylon, and the darkest hour Jerusalem has ever known. Jerusalem under siege, Babylon, and the exile. A pale dawn rises over the hills surrounding Jerusalem, casting a muted glow across olive groves and stone houses. The air is still almost hesitant, as though the land itself senses the weight of what is coming. In the distance, smoke curls faintly from cooking fires. Women draw water from pools, children chase one another through narrow lanes, and priests ascend the steps of the temple to prepare for the morning offering. Yet beneath this quiet routine lies a growing unease. Judah has watched the fall of its northern sister Israel under the iron heel of Assyria. Though Jerusalem survived the earlier Assyrian onslaught, thanks to reforms, diplomacy, and perhaps fortune, a new power now rises in the east, one that is younger, hungry, and far more unpredictable. Babylon. With its towering walls, bustling gates, and armies hardened under kings like Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon has become the dominant force in the ancient Near East, and Judah is caught in the tightening jaws of international conflict. The rise of Babylon and Judah's vulnerable position. The documentary lens travels across the vast plains of Mesopotamia, settling on the magnificent city of Babylon. Its temples rise like mountain peaks of brick and stone. Its ziggurats loom over the horizon. Its military parades thunder along wide avenues. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon becomes both a cultural marvel and a geopolitical titan. For Judah, the danger is immediate. Its location makes it a strategic buffer between Egyptian ambitions and Babylonian expansion. Rival empires have long used Judah as a pawn, pressing it into alliances, rebellions, and tribute payments. Internally, Judah struggles with political factions. Some advocate aligning with Egypt, others urge submission to Babylon. Still others cling to visions of independence rooted in prophetic assurances. These divisions weaken the state just as external pressures intensify. The first siege, 597 BC. The film transitions to Jerusalem's walls as dust rises on the horizon. Babylonian banners approach. Nebuchadnezzar moves swiftly to crush rebellion and assert dominance. The city's leaders, unprepared for the scale of Babylonian, might open the gates after a brief resistance. In this first deportation, the king Jehoiakim, members of the royal family, elite officials, craftsmen, and soldiers are taken to Babylon. Their departure is wrenching a fracture in the nation's social and political life. Jeremiah the prophet, who witnessed these events, laments with raw emotional power. A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping. Archaeological evidence supports the upheaval. Babylonian administrative tablets, listing deported Judeans' remnants of destruction in Jerusalem's layers, sudden changes in population, and economic patterns. Judah survives, but as a vassal state. Zedekiah, a puppet king, is installed by Babylon, yet rebellion simmers beneath the surface. The final rebellion and Babylon's wrath. The documentary camera darkens, clouds gather over the Judean hills. Fearing Babylon's tightening grip, Judah's leaders again turn toward Egypt for support. Zedekiah rebels. The decision is catastrophic. Nebuchadnezzar responds with overwhelming force. In 588 BC, the Babylonian army surrounds Jerusalem. Siege walls rise against the city's defenses. Camps stretch across the valleys. Soldiers cut off all roads and water supplies. No one enters, no one leaves. Inside the city walls, famine grows. Grain stores empty. Bread becomes scarce, then precious, then non-existent. Disease spreads in crowded quarters. Archaeological excavations reveal arrowheads, collapsed walls, charred grains, silent witnesses to the trauma of siege warfare. Prophets warn, but their voices are lost amid fear and desperation. 586 BC, the fall of Jerusalem. The camera freezes on the temple's outer courts in the pre-dawn light, then slowly pans upward as the first flames appear. After 2 years of siege, the Babylonians breach the walls. Fighting erupts in narrow streets. Zedekiah flees toward the Jordan Valley but is captured. His sons are killed before his eyes, and he is blinded. A harsh symbolic act meant to extinguish royal legitimacy. Then comes the moment that will define Jewish history for centuries. The temple burns. Babylonian soldiers set fire to its cedar beams, its gold-plated furnishings, its storerooms and courts. The center of Judah's religious identity, built by Solomon, maintained by generations, collapses into ash and ruin. The smoke rises like a black pillar over the city as priests and onlookers weep. Jerusalem's walls are broken down, homes are destroyed, survivors are chained and marched into exile. The city that once housed the Ark, the Psalms and the memories of kings, now lies silent, charred, and abandoned. The destruction is total. Exile in Babylon, a people in a strange land. The documentary shifts to a new landscape, the wide irrigated plains of Mesopotamia. Channels glisten under the sun, date palms sway in the wind. Massive temples dominate the skyline. Here the exiled communities of Judah begin the long process of survival. Babylon does not destroy its captives. Instead, it resettles them in agricultural and urban enclaves. Clay tablets discovered by archaeologists, including the famous Al-Yahudu archive record, Judean names in administrative lists, legal documents, and business contracts. These records show a community living, working, and adapting far from home. The exiles struggle emotionally and spiritually. Their homeland is gone. The temple lies in ruins. The Davidic kingship is broken. Their world political, religious, cultural seems shattered. Yet remarkably, this moment of loss becomes the seedbed of renewal. 3 profound transformations take place. 1. Textual tradition strengthens. Stories, laws, and histories are written, edited, and refined. Memory becomes the foundation of identity. 2. Synagogue life emerges. With no temple, communal gatherings for prayer and study grow in importance. 3. A new theological understanding develops. Prophets like Ezekiel and 2nd Isaiah speak of restoration hope and a God who can be worshipped anywhere, not just in Jerusalem. Exile reshapes Judaism into a portable faith. A remnant remains in Judah. Not all Judeans are deported. Archaeology reveals continued life in rural areas. Fields are cultivated, grapes are pressed. Families persist among the ruins. These communities maintain a fragile link to the land even as political control shifts. The prophet Jeremiah remains behind for a time, offering guidance to survivors and warning against further rebellion. But even this small remnant faces turmoil as local conflicts escalate. The stage is set for return. As the sun sets over Babylon's canals and Jerusalem's broken walls, the narrative pauses. Judah has fallen. Its people are scattered across an empire. Its memory hangs in the balance between survival and oblivion. And yet history is already turning again. In the distant east, a new power is rising, a remarkably different kind of empire led by a king known for both strength and mercy. His name is Cyrus. His empire is Persia, and he will change everything. Ahead lies rebuilding and the extraordinary rise of the Second Temple. Return and rebuilding, the Second Temple rises. Dawn breaks gently over the distant Zagros Mountains. Soft light spills across a land newly claimed by a rising empire, Persia, whose banners now flutter over the once mighty cities of Mesopotamia. In the cool morning air, merchants stir in Babylon's crowded markets, soldiers change their night watch, and exiled communities awaken to a world transformed. The city's familiar skyline, its ziggurats, its canals, its storied walls remains the same, but the empire that governs it has changed hands. In 539 BC, Cyrus the Great of Persia captured Babylon without the catastrophic destruction that typified earlier conquests. His arrival marks a moment of profound political and cultural shift. Unlike the Assyrians or Babylonians, whose power rested on fear and forced assimilation, the Persians embrace a different philosophy: tolerance, local autonomy, and the restoration of displaced peoples. For the Judeans living in exile, this is nothing short of miraculous. The Edict of Cyrus, A New Dawn. The documentary lens moves slowly through the halls of a Persian administrative center. Scribes in long robes press cuneiform symbols into wet clay. Persian and Babylonian officials confer over scrolls. Among the edicts issued in these early years of the empire is a decree that will echo through history. The Judeans are allowed, even encouraged, to return home. They may rebuild the temple. They may restore their religious life. They may reclaim their identity as a people rooted in the land of their ancestors. The Cyrus Cylinder, often called the world's first declaration of human rights, reveals the king's policy of restoring local cults and sanctuaries. While it does not mention Judah by name, its worldview aligns precisely with the biblical account. Cyrus authorizes displaced peoples to rebuild their temples as part of Persia's strategy to stabilize the empire. For the Judean exiles, news spreads like a breath of wind across parched ground. Tears flow, songs long silenced rise again. Elderly captives who once sat by the rivers of Babylon, mourning Zion, now whisper to each other, "We will see Jerusalem again." The journey home. The camera follows a caravan moving westward along ancient trade routes. Families walk beside pack animals loaded with tools, scrolls, and household goods. Children tug at their parents' robes, excited by the long journey. Priests carry sacred vessels, saved from the Babylonian conquest. The journey covers hundreds of miles from the lush plains of Mesopotamia to the arid hills of Judah. Many exiles remain in Babylon, where life has become stable and familiar, but a devoted remnant undertakes the expedition with determination. Archaeology confirms that this return was gradual, occurring in several waves over nearly a century. Each group faced challenges: ruined cities, overgrown fields, political uncertainty, and the presence of populations that had settled in Judah during the exile. The land they return to is not the same land their ancestors left. Jerusalem in ruins. The first sight of Jerusalem is devastating. The camera pans across broken walls, collapsed houses, and charred foundations. The city that once rang with psalms and festivals now lies quiet, haunted by absence. The Temple Mount is a desolate plateau strewn with rubble. For those who remember Solomon's shining sanctuary, the sight is almost unbearable. But amid the ruins, hope stirs. The land smells of earth and possibility. The walls may be broken, but the story is not finished. The returning exiles, led by figures like Zerubbabel, a descendant of David, and Joshua the high priest, begin the slow, difficult work of rebuilding. Rebuilding the temple faith amid hardship. The documentary shifts to the Temple Mount, where workers clear debris under the hot Judean sun. Stones are dragged into place. Wooden scaffolds rise. The altar, the heart of ritual life, is reconstructed first so that sacrifices and festivals can resume even before the temple's foundations are fully laid. This act is profoundly symbolic. It proclaims to the world and to the returning people themselves that the covenant endures. Yet the process faces opposition. Surrounding communities, Samaritans, Ammonites, and others, challenge the project for political and religious reasons. Conflicting claims to identity and authority flare into disputes recorded both in biblical texts and in Persian administrative correspondence. Years pass, work slows, enthusiasm wanes. The foundation is laid, but the structure remains unfinished. Then two prophets rise, Haggai and Zechariah. Their voices, captured in stirring poetic oracles, call the people to action. They remind them that the temple is more than a building. It is the anchor of identity, the symbol of divine presence, and the hope of a weary nation. Their message rekindles determination. Under favorable Persian oversight, now under the reign of King Darius I, and with renewed communal effort, the Second Temple is completed around 516 BC. The documentary presents the moment with quiet reverence. Old men weep, remembering the first temple. Younger generations celebrate with music and offerings. Priests ascend the steps in newly woven garments. It is humbler than Solomon's temple, smaller, less ornate, but its significance is immense. A people once exiled now stand again in their holy city in a sanctuary built by their own hands. Ezra, Nehemiah, and the shaping of a renewed community. The story does not end with bricks and mortar. Decades later, more waves of exiles return under leaders like Ezra and Nehemiah, whose combined efforts reshape Jewish identity in lasting ways. Ezra arrives as a priest and scholar. He brings with him not armies, but texts, scrolls containing laws, histories, and traditions refined during the exile. He calls the people to hear and understand the Torah, emphasizing its central role in communal life. The documentary camera lingers on a powerful moment. Ezra stands on a wooden platform, unrolling a scroll before the assembled crowd. As he reads, people weep not from sorrow, but from recognition. This is their heritage, their covenant, their way forward. Nehemiah, in contrast, is a statesman and builder. With Persian authorization, he arrives to find Jerusalem's walls in ruins and its people discouraged. He rallies workers by day and organizes guards by night. The wall is rebuilt in astonishing speed. Stones rise where rubble had lain for decades. Watchtowers stand once more against the horizon. With the walls complete, Jerusalem again becomes a fortified, functioning city, a capital worthy of its spiritual significance. Together, Ezra and Nehemiah not only rebuild structures, but rebuild identity. A new kind of Judaism emerges. By the time the Persian period matures, a fundamental transformation has occurred. Judaism is no longer primarily a religion of land and monarchy. It has become a religion of text community memory, ethical commitment worship centered on Torah and temple, and the belief that God's presence accompanies His people wherever they go. This shift will enable Jewish survival through future catastrophes, including the one that awaits in AD 70. A gentle transition toward the next era. The camera pulls slowly away from Jerusalem as the sun sets over its freshly built walls. The city glows with renewed life, priests singing evening psalms, families lighting fires, merchants closing their stalls. The Second Temple stands quiet and dignified atop the mount, its silhouette framed against the darkening sky. But beyond the horizon, change once again gathers. New powers rise, Greece then Rome. New tensions simmer, cultural, political, spiritual. The rebuilt temple will endure for centuries, but it will not stand forever. Ahead lies the age of Hellenism, a time when Greek culture sweeps across the Near East, reshaping the Jewish world in subtle and dramatic ways. Under Greek shadows, Hellenism and Jewish resistance. Morning light spills across the eastern horizon as a restless wind moves through the Judean hills. The world that the returning exiles rebuilt, a world centered on temple Torah and community, now stands at the threshold of a new era. Far to the west, across seas and mountains, another force is gathering momentum. It is not an empire of ancient gods like Babylon, nor a massive bureaucratic machine like Persia. It is something new, Hellenism, the sweeping cultural revolution ignited by the conquests of Alexander the Great. The camera widens its gaze. Under a sky of deep blue, young Alexander strides across the stage of world history, leading armies with unmatched speed and strategy. By 330 BC Persia, the empire that allowed the Judeans to return home lies defeated. Its cities are absorbed into a vast territory stretching from Greece to Egypt, from Syria to the edges of India. With this conquest comes a cultural transformation. Greek language spreads across the Near East. Greek-style cities, known as polis, rise in once foreign lands. Philosophy, art, architecture, and political ideas flow along new trade routes. Hellenism becomes not merely a culture, but a cosmopolitan ideology, blending Greek aesthetics with local traditions. For the Jewish people living in the modest province of Judea, this new world brings opportunity, tension, and ultimately conflict. A new cultural landscape. The documentary lens descends over newly founded cities, Alexandria in Egypt, where the famed library will soon attract scholars from many traditions. Antioch in Syria, bustling with Greek theaters, gymnasiums, and marketplaces, and smaller Hellenistic towns where Greek settlers and local populations mix their languages and customs. In these urban centers, Judeans encounter a world that values reason, competition, physical training, and civic participation. Greek becomes the lingua franca of scholarship and administration. Trade flourishes. Jewish merchants, scribes, and philosophers find new opportunities beyond the boundaries of their ancestral land. The city of Alexandria becomes home to one of the largest Jewish diasporas in antiquity. Here, Jewish scholars translate their sacred scriptures into Greek, a monumental work known as the Septuagint. This translation will shape Judaism, Christianity, and Western thought for millennia. Yet even as some Jews embrace elements of Greek culture, others see in Hellenism a threat, a seductive force that could erode traditional values, religious distinctiveness, and the covenantal identity forged through exile and return. Judea under the successor kingdoms. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, his empire fractures into rival kingdoms. Judea becomes caught between two major powers, the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Seleucids of Syria. For nearly a century, Judea passes peacefully between these rulers. The Ptolemies impose moderate taxation but allow local autonomy. Under their rule, Jerusalem flourishes as a regional center of learning and worship. The temple remains intact. Priests oversee rituals and festivals. Everyday life remains stable. But under the Seleucids, the situation becomes more volatile. The camera shifts to the reign of Antiochus III, who initially favors Jewish autonomy. But his successors, especially Antiochus IV Epiphanes, see Judea not as a cultural crossroads, but as a territory that must be ideologically unified under Hellenism. At first, tensions seem manageable. Greek gymnasiums appear, elite Jewish families adopt Greek names. Some seek to integrate Jewish religious practice into a broader philosophical framework interpreting Torah in Hellenistic terms. But beneath the surface, ideological fault lines deepen. Antiochus IV and the crisis of identity. The tone darkens. The camera focuses on Antiochus IV, a ruler ambitious, unpredictable, and determined to consolidate his empire. When internal rivalries among Jewish leaders erupt over control of the high priesthood, Antiochus intervenes decisively. He appoints and dismisses priests according to political loyalty rather than lineage or tradition. When Judea becomes embroiled in rebellion, Antiochus responds with escalation, a harsh crackdown designed to eliminate dissent and enforce cultural conformity. Historical records and archaeological evidence align with the biblical account. Traditional sacrifices are halted. Circumcision is banned. Torah scrolls are destroyed. Greek gods are installed in the temple itself. The desecration of the altar, remembered as the abomination that causes desolation, marks one of the darkest moments in Jewish history. The temple, the sacred heart of the nation, becomes a symbol of foreign domination. The Jewish people face a stark choice: assimilate or resist. Rural resistance and the spark of revolt. The documentary camera shifts to a small village in the Judean countryside Modian. Here, an elderly priest named Mattathias refuses to offer a pagan sacrifice on behalf of the king. In an explosive moment of defiance, he kills the royal agent, enforcing the order, and calls upon all who are faithful to flee into the hills. His cry becomes the spark of rebellion. Mattathias's sons, particularly Judah Maccabee, transform scattered bands of resistors into a guerrilla force. They know the hills and valleys intimately. They use ambush tactics, nighttime attacks, and strategic retreats. Their cause ignites the hearts of many who have watched their traditions violated and their temple defiled. What follows is a struggle of astonishing intensity. The Maccabean Revolt, lasting impact of Hellenistic conflict. The documentary lens moves across rocky terrain where Maccabean fighters clash with Seleucid forces. Despite overwhelming odds, the rebels seize victory after victory. Their determination, fueled by religious conviction and cultural identity, offsets the superior numbers and equipment of their adversaries. In 164 BC, they recapture Jerusalem and ascend the steps of the defiled temple. The camera slows, capturing the symbolic moment, priests clearing out pagan altars, relighting the lamps, and dedicating the sanctuary once more to their God. This event is commemorated each year as Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. The revolt does not end immediately. Conflict continues for decades. But ultimately, the Jewish rebels establish an independent kingdom, the Hasmonean dynasty, one of the few periods of Jewish sovereignty in antiquity. Hellenism's dual legacy. As the scene widens to show the larger Mediterranean world, the film emphasizes the complexity of this era. Hellenism is not simply an enemy, it becomes part of Jewish identity in lasting ways. Greek language and philosophy influenced Jewish thinkers. Diaspora communities adopt a hybrid cultural life. Artistic styles, architectural forms, and literary genres blend traditions. Yet resistance to forced assimilation strengthens Jewish religious commitment, textual interpretation, and communal boundaries. Judaism emerges from this era more self-aware, more literate, and more unified in purpose. Hellenism challenges Judaism and ultimately sharpens it. A transition toward a new imperial power. As the sun sets over Jerusalem, the camera pulls back. The city stands renewed after the Maccabean victory, its temple purified, and its walls once again illuminated by the glow of evening fires. But beyond the glow, another shadow grows on the horizon. From the west comes a republic turned empire, disciplined, calculating, and destined to dominate the world Rome. Its legions are marching nearer. Its politics will shape Judea's destiny. Its rule will test the Second Temple era as never before. Ahead lies Rome's arrival, the age of Herod sects conflict and the road to revolution. The Maccabean Revolt and the Hasmonean kingdom. Morning settles over the Judean highlands with a pale, steady light. The hills that once echoed with the footsteps of Maccabean fighters now lie quiet, washed clean by the slow passing of decades. Yet beneath this calm landscape lies the memory of one of the most dramatic chapters in Jewish history, a chapter defined by rebellion restoration and the fragile experiment of independence. The camera opens on the rocky terrain near Modihin, where the first spark of resistance was lit. Wind sweeps across the stone outcrops where Mattathias once raised his voice against forced Hellenization. The rebellion that followed not only overturned the decrees of a foreign king, but also set the stage for a century of Jewish sovereignty, a rare moment of self-rule between the First and Second Temple destructions. But with victory came new challenges. How would a people long shaped by empire, Persian, Greek, Seleucid govern themselves? How would they balance priestly authority with kingship? How would internal divisions, external pressures, and competing visions of identity shape the fragile Hasmonean state? The documentary journey begins at the moment the revolt is won, and a new kingdom begins. After the victory, cleansing and reclaiming the temple. The film shifts to 164 BC, the year Jerusalem is retaken. Smoke from the last battles still lingers in the air as Judah Maccabee and his fighters ascend the Temple Mount. The sanctuary is desecrated altars, broken idols, installed sacred vessels, stolen or defiled. The camera lingers on a poignant tableau: priests in worn garments, sweeping rubble workers repairing walls by torchlight, musicians tuning instruments, long silent. In a ceremony filled with urgency and awe, the altar is purified, new oil is prepared, and the menorah is relit. This rededication, remembered as Hanukkah, symbolizes not just military victory, but spiritual restoration, the reclaiming of identity after the trauma of imposed culture. The temple shines again, but the struggle for independence has only begun. Judah Maccabee warrior and symbol Judah, the charismatic leader of the revolt, becomes a symbol of resistance. The Seleucid threat persists, and Judah continues to wage campaigns to secure Judean independence. His forces win remarkable victories, outmaneuvering larger armies and leveraging their intimate knowledge of the land. but heroism has limits. Judah dies in battle around 160 BC, falling to the overwhelming might of a Seleucid counterattack. The documentary voice softens as the camera moves over a simple burial site. Judah's death could have marked the end of the rebellion, but instead it galvanizes his brothers and supporters. His legacy fuels the next phase, statecraft. Jonathan and Simon statesmen in a shifting empire. The Seleucid Empire, weakened by internal strife and far-reaching wars, becomes vulnerable to skillful diplomacy. Judah's brother Jonathan emerges as a gifted negotiator. He plays rival Seleucid claimants against one another, extracting concessions that expand Jewish autonomy. The camera shows Jonathan accepting the role of high priest, a move that intertwines political and religious authority. This shift marks the beginning of Hasmonean dynasty, a priestly family now functioning as rulers. Jonathan expands Judean territory, fortifies Jerusalem, and secures relative peace. But he too meets a tragic end, captured and killed in Seleucid intrigue. His brother Simon succeeds him, building on diplomatic gains to establish what historians often call de facto independence. In 142 BC, Simon secures formal recognition from a weakening Seleucid empire. For the first time since the fall of the First Temple, Judea stands free. This moment is etched in stone coins bearing Simon's name, documents proclaiming autonomy, renewed pilgrimages to the temple. The Hasmonean kingdom is born, the Hasmonean dynasty, between faith and power. As the narrative deepens, the documentary tone becomes more analytical. Independence brings pride, but also new challenges. 1. Expansion and ambition. Under rulers like John Hyrcanus, Judea grows rapidly. New territories are conquered, formerly hostile groups are subdued, fortresses and cities are rebuilt. The kingdom expands far beyond the modest boundaries of early post-exilic Judah. 2. Religious tension and identity. But expansion comes with consequences. The forced conversion of neighboring peoples, including the Idumeans, introduces complex debates about religious purity and political legitimacy. The Hasmoneans, originally priestly leaders of a rebellion against assimilation, now command an army, collect taxes, and govern a diverse population. Their rule blends Torah-based tradition with Hellenistic political structure. Coins bear both Hebrew and Greek inscriptions, reflecting the cultural duality of the time. 3. Internal conflict and sectarianism. The camera moves into the streets of Jerusalem, now a bustling capital with competing voices. The Hasmonean rule intensifies divisions among Jewish groups. Pharisees advocate strict interpretation of Torah and emphasize oral tradition. Sadducees align with priestly elites and aristocratic interests. Essenes withdraw into ascetic communities near the Dead Sea, rejecting temple leadership. Zealots, or their ideological precursors, stir early calls for militant independence. These tensions foreshadow the spiritual and political landscape of the time of Jesus and the eventual revolt against Rome. The height of Hasmonean power. Under Alexander Jannaeus and Queen Salome Alexandra, the kingdom reaches its greatest extent and influence. The documentary lens shows Judean soldiers marching through conquered territories, priests performing elaborate rituals in the Second Temple, and scholars engaging in lively debate in courtyard academies. Jerusalem rises as a regional power, fortified, wealthy, and culturally vibrant. But beneath the surface, factionalism grows fiercer. Civil war erupts between rival sects. The monarchy becomes simultaneously powerful and unstable. The Hasmonean dynasty, born of a fight for purity and autonomy, now struggles under the pressures of expansion, ambition, and competing visions for the future. The Roman shadow approaches. The camera pulls away to reveal a larger geopolitical map. To the west, Rome is expanding into Greece and Asia Minor. Its legions march with disciplined precision. Its diplomats weave alliances with calculated intent. By the 1st century, BC Rome's influence begins to permeate the eastern Mediterranean. The weakened Seleucid Empire collapses. Rival claimants to the Hasmonean throne appeal to Rome for support, a catastrophic miscalculation. In 63 BC, Roman General Pompey intervenes in Judean politics. His forces enter Jerusalem after a brief siege. The temple is not destroyed, but Roman soldiers step into the Holy of Holies, a shocking sacrilege. With this moment, Jewish independence begins to unravel. The Hasmonean kingdom, once born from resistance to empire, now becomes entangled in the machinery of a far greater imperial power. A kingdom's end and a new political order. The documentary camera returns to the Judean hills at sunset. The last Hasmonean rulers fade into the shadows of Roman ambition. Their kingdom, fractured by internal divisions and external entanglements, gives way to Roman administrators and client kings. And among these kings will rise one figure, powerful, controversial, and transformative, Herod the Great. Under Herod and under Roman rule, Judea will gain monumental architecture, internal strife, and the emergence of the sects that shape the spiritual landscape of the early 1st century AD. The stage is set. As the evening light dims over Jerusalem's walls and the Second Temple glows in the twilight, the next era waits in silence. Ahead lies Rome, and with it the final chapters, leading to revolt, destruction, and the burning of the Second Temple. Rome arrives, Herod's sectarianism, and the cracks of empire. Dawn settles over the Judean hills with a pale, almost metallic light. The early sky is quiet, but beneath that quiet, a new world is forming, a world shaped not by local kings or neighboring empires, but by the vast machinery of Rome. The old Hasmonean kingdom, once born in rebellion and briefly flourishing in independence, now lies under a shadow stretching all the way from the Tiber River to the deserts of Arabia. The documentary lens opens with Roman soldiers marching along the coastal plain. Their sandals crunch along the packed earth of a road engineered with perfect precision. Their armor glints in the sun. Legionary standards sway with each measured step. For the first time, Judea is becoming part of a system unlike anything the region has ever known. Rome has arrived, and its arrival will reshape every dimension of Jewish life: political, religious, cultural, and social. Pompey and the end of Jewish independence. It begins with politics. In 63 BC, Pompey Magnus, one of Rome's most celebrated generals, is drawn into a Hasmonean succession dispute. Two brothers, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, each seek Roman support. Pompey chooses Hyrcanus, but the rivalry plunges Jerusalem into chaos. Roman intervention escalates. Siege engines rise against the city's walls. Roman troops storm the temple precincts. Pompey himself enters the Holy of Holies, a moment of profound desecration, recorded by Jewish and Roman historians alike. The Hasmonean dynasty survives in name for a few more decades, but its autonomy is gone. Judea becomes a client state of Rome, its rulers answerable not to prophets or priests, but to governors, generals, and senatorial politics unfolding thousands of miles away. Herod the Great, a brilliant and terrible king. The documentary transitions to a striking silhouette rising through desert heat. Herod the Great, a man of immense ambition and contradictory legacy. He is not Hasmonean by paternal lineage, nor fully accepted by the Jewish populace. Yet Rome appoints him king of the Jews in 40 BC, and he rules until 4 BC, transforming the landscape with unprecedented architectural splendor. Herod's achievements. The camera sweeps across massive building projects, the expansion of the Second Temple creating a dazzling complex whose marble and gold dazzle pilgrims from across the Mediterranean. The port city of Caesarea Maritima, with its deep-water harbor amphitheater and Roman-style forum. Fortresses like Masada Hyrcania and Herodium, perched above desert cliffs, with engineering marvels of water systems and defensive architecture. Renovations of Jerusalem, including markets, palaces, and public works. Herod brings wealth stability and Roman favor, but he rules with paranoia and iron severity. Herod's darkness. He executes rivals, including members of his own family. He cracks down on dissent. He balances Roman expectations with Jewish tradition, often pleasing neither side fully. He is remembered as both tyrant and visionary, a king who leaves behind stone monuments and political scars that will influence Judea long after his death. A land divided sectarian movements and religious factions. As Herod's grand structures rise, deep ideological divisions widen among the Jewish people. The documentary lens moves into Jerusalem's crowded streets and desert communities, showing the diversity of belief and practice at the turn of the millennium. The Pharisees, scholars, and teachers devoted to the interpretation of Torah and the oral law. They emphasize purity ethics and the idea that holiness can be lived in daily life, not only in the temple. The Sadducees, priestly aristocrats connected to the temple hierarchy. They favor the status quo, cooperate more with Rome, and maintain traditional sacrificial worship as the core of Jewish life. The Essenes, ascetic communities, perhaps including the inhabitants of Qumran by the Dead Sea. They withdraw from what they see as a corrupt temple system and await divine intervention to purify the world. Zealot movement and precursor groups, militant nationalists who reject any form of foreign rule. Their belief that God alone is king fuels underground movements that will eventually ignite open revolt. Common people, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, widows, shepherds, ordinary Judeans navigating a world of heavy taxation, economic hardship, and political tension. These groups frequently clash over theology, law, leadership, and identity. Their rivalries weaken Judea internally even as external pressures grow, economy, society, and daily life under Rome. The documentary shifts to everyday scenes in the countryside. Farmers tend olive groves and terrace vineyards, but inflation tribute payments and temple tithes strain household economies. Tenant farming and debt become widespread. In urban centers, merchants navigate Roman taxation and customs. Artisans carve stone-weave textiles and bake bread for bustling markets. Roman coins circulate alongside local ones. In Jerusalem, pilgrims arrive from across the diaspora for festivals filling the streets with diverse accents and clothing. The temple becomes a focal point for religious devotion and mounting anxiety. Despite tensions, life continues. Children study Torah. Trades are taught from father to son. Women run households and small businesses. Rabbis teach in courtyards. Farmers work the land their ancestors cultivated for generations. Yet beneath the routines, the Roman presence grows heavier. Growing oppression and rising anger. The Roman governors assigned to Judea, often unfamiliar with Jewish customs, make increasingly provocative decisions. Census requirements ignite suspicion. Soldiers stationed near the temple cause resentment. Mismanaged funds, corruption, and abuses of power deepen hostility. Daily humiliations accumulate like dry brush, waiting for a spark. Some governors attempt compromise. Others, like Pontius Pilate and later Gessius Florus, fan the flames of revolt through cruelty and greed. The documentary tone grows tense. Crowds gather at the temple gates. Angry debates erupt in marketplaces. Bands of zealots train in the hills. Rome, distracted by internal civil wars, underestimates the rising storm. Herod's legacy and the looming crisis. Herod's death creates political fragmentation. His kingdom is divided among his sons, each ruling smaller territories under Roman oversight. Judea itself becomes increasingly unstable, governed at times by inept or corrupt officials whose mismanagement pushes the populace toward rebellion. The great structures Herod built, the temple platform, the palaces, the fortresses, stand as silent witnesses to a society under pressure. In these final decades before the revolt, the Jewish people find themselves torn between loyalty to tradition, hope for autonomy, religious diversity, and the suffocating reality of Roman rule. A spark could ignite everything, and that spark is coming. A gathering storm. As the camera rises over Jerusalem, the Second Temple glows in the evening sun, magnificent, imposing a symbol of enduring faith. Pilgrims crowd its courts. Priests recite prayers. Incense drifts through the air. It is a scene of beauty, but also of tension. Roman fortresses loom nearby. Soldiers watch from battlements. Sectarian arguments echo in narrow alleyways. Zealot cells whisper of rebellion. The common people feel trapped between taxes and faith empire and hope. Night begins to fall. A deep red sunset spreads across the Judean horizon as if foreshadowing the bloodshed to come. Ahead lies the great revolt, the siege of Jerusalem, the burning of the Second Temple, and a rupture that will transform Jewish history forever. Fire on the Mount, the Great Revolt, and the destruction of the Second Temple, AD 70. Dawn breaks over Jerusalem, but it is not the soft dawn of earlier centuries. The sky glows a muted red through a haze of dust and smoke drifting in from the surrounding hills. The city stirs uneasily. Chickens cluck in courtyards. Merchants quietly lift shutters. Priests ascend the steps of the temple for the morning offerings. But beneath these daily rhythms lies a deep and growing dread. For years, tension has been building tension, born of oppressive Roman governors, heavy taxation, religious insults, sectarian conflict, and the unquenchable desire of many for independence. In AD 66, it erupts into open revolt. In this final chapter, the documentary lens witnesses the last days of the Second Temple and the end of an age. A revolt ignited. The spark comes from a brutal incident. The Roman procurator Gessius Florus seizes temple funds and slaughters protesters. Outrage sweeps Jerusalem like a wildfire. Zealot groups rise up, assassinating collaborators and Roman troops. The city explodes into chaos. At first, the rebellion is astonishingly successful. Jewish forces defeat a Roman legion at Beth Horon, a shocking humiliation for the empire. Rebel banners fly from fortresses across Judea. The temple courts fill with celebrations and prayers. For a moment it seems as if independence might truly be at hand. But Rome does not tolerate defiance. News reaches Emperor Nero, and he dispatches a veteran general Vespasian to crush the revolt. When Nero dies, Vespasian becomes emperor, leaving his son Titus to finish the campaign. The Roman response will be nothing short of total war. The Roman war machine descends. The documentary camera widens to show thousands of Roman troops marching south. The ground shakes beneath their disciplined stride. Siege towers and battering rams roll across dusty plains. Auxiliary troops, Syrians, Arabs, Thracians, join the legions, forming a vast multinational force. One by one, Judean strongholds fall Galilee after fierce resistance. Jotapata, where the historian Josephus is captured. Gishala, whose defenders flee before Roman swords. Refugees stream toward Jerusalem, bringing stories of Roman brutality. Inside the city walls, fear grows, and with fear, fragmentation. Factionalism. Inside Jerusalem, a city at war with itself. By AD 68, Jerusalem is gripped not only by Roman encirclement, but by bitter internal strife. Zealot groups occupy the temple complex. Moderates gather on the upper city's terraces. Rival factions destroy each other's food supplies, believing divine intervention will protect them. Ancient texts describe gang warfare, assassinations, and chaos within the sacred city. The camera enters the temple courts, once the heart of devotion, now transformed into a political and military arena. Armed men patrol the colonnades. Debates turn violent. Passover pilgrims trapped inside the walls face the horrors of war. This division, more than any Roman tactic, seals Jerusalem's fate. The Siege of Jerusalem, AD 70. As summer heat descends, Titus surrounds the city with siege walls, cutting off all escape. The siege tightens like a noose. Famine takes hold. Grain stores diminish. Water becomes scarce. People collapse in alleyways. Families tear apart breadcrumbs for survival. Archaeological excavations reveal charred grain cooking vessels, abandoned mid-meal, and skeletons buried hastily beneath collapsed homes, haunting evidence of desperation. Rome's siege engines pound the walls. The thud of battering rams echoes across valleys. Stones from catapults crash onto rooftops. The once proud towers of Jerusalem shake under the assault. Slowly, inexorably, the outer defenses fall. Assault on the Temple Mount. The camera moves to the Mount of Olives, where Roman generals stand surveying the city. The temple glitters in the sunlight, a magnificent structure of marble cedar and gold plating. Its courtyards are filled with conflict and prayer. For the Romans, it is both target and trophy. For the Jewish defenders, it is the last sanctuary, the heart of their identity. After breaking through the Antonia fortress, Roman forces pour into the temple complex. White marble stairs echo with the clamor of blades and shields. Fires ignite among the cloisters. The defenders fight desperately, driven by faith and despair. Then comes the moment that will define Jewish memory for millennia. A Roman soldier hurls a torch into the sanctuary. Flames catch on the cedar beams. Wind feeds the growing inferno. The second temple, rebuilt after exile expanded by Herod, the soul of a nation erupts in fire. The documentary slows, showing the golden doors, collapsing priests crying out, amid the flame smoke swirling into the sky in a great dark column visible for miles. History breathes in quiet horror. The temple is burning. The fall of Jerusalem. The destruction spreads throughout the city. Walls crumble. Homes are engulfed. The Roman legions move methodically through each district, securing victory street by street. Thousands die. Thousands more are enslaved and taken to Rome, where they will be paraded in triumphal processions, their defeat immortalized on the Arch of Titus, still standing today. Jerusalem, the city of David, the center of Jewish life, lies in ruins. Archaeologists have uncovered this devastation: charred beams, smashed pottery coins from the Revolt, and the broken stones of the temple hurled down by Roman engineers. The earth itself remembers the fall, the end of an era, the birth of another. With the temple destroyed and Judea crushed, one might expect Jewish identity to vanish. But instead, something extraordinary occurs. Out of the ashes emerges a new kind of Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, a tradition centered not on temple sacrifice, but on text law and communal life. Synagogues replace altars, study replaces sacrifice, prayer replaces offerings. The documentary lens follows small groups of survivors traveling to towns like Yavne, where scholars gather under Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai. They debate, write, interpret, and rebuild spiritual life without a temple. The Jewish people, though scattered, begin creating a portable, resilient identity that will endure through exile, diaspora, and centuries of wandering. The destruction of the temple is not the end, it is the turning point. A final visual, the mountain of fire. The film closes with a slow, sweeping shot over the smoldering ruins of Jerusalem. Smoke curls upward from collapsed stones. The gleam of the temple's gold is gone, replaced by scorched rubble. But the camera catches something else, survivors picking through the debris, gathering fragments, consoling one another, beginning the long work of rebuilding memory. Even in devastation, life persists. The sky shifts from red to deep indigo. Stars emerge over the ruined city. The smoke thins in the cool air. A chapter of history has ended. A new one is beginning.